Ahithophel by Louis Ginzberg. Among David's courtiers and attendants, a prominent place is occupied by his counselor Ahithophel, 60, with whom the king was connected by family ties, Bathsheba being his granddaughter. 61. Ahithophel's wisdom was supernatural, for his counsels always coincided with the oracles rendered by the Urim and Thummim, and great as was his wisdom, it was equaled by his scholarship. Therefore David did not hesitate to submit himself to his instruction. 62. Even though Ahithophel was a very young man, at the time of his death not more than 33 years old. 63. The one thing lacking in him was sincere piety. 64. And this it was that proved his undoing in the end, for it induced him to take part in Absalom's rebellion against David. Thus he forfeited even his share in the world to come. 65. To this dire course of action, he was misled by astrologic and other signs, which he interpreted as prophecies of his own kingship, when in reality they pointed to the royal destiny of his granddaughter Bathsheba. 66. Possessed by his erroneous belief, he cunningly urged Absalom to commit an unheard-of crime. Thus Absalom would profit nothing by his rebellion, for, though he accomplished his father's ruin, he would yet be held to account and condemned to death for his violation of family purity, and the way to the throne would be clear for Ahithophel, the great sage in Israel. 67. The relation between David and Ahithophel had been somewhat strained even before Absalom's rebellion. Ahithophel's feelings had been hurt by his being passed over at the time when David, shortly after ascending the throne, invested, on a single day, no less than 90,000 functionaries with positions. On that day, a remarkable incident occurred. When the ark was to be brought up from Jebah to Jerusalem, the priests who attempted to take hold of it were raised up in the air and thrown violently to the ground. In his despair, the king turned for advice to Ahithophel, who retorted mockingly, "Ask thy wise men whom thou hast but now installed in office." It was only when David uttered a curse on him, who knows a remedy and withholds it from the sufferer, that Ahithophel advised that a sacrifice should be offered at every step taken by the priests. Although the measure proved efficacious, and no further disaster occurred in connection with the ark, yet Ahithophel's words had been insincere. He knew the real reason of the misadventure and concealed it from the king. Instead of following the law of having the ark carried on the shoulders of priests, David had had it put on a wagon, and so incurred the wrath of God. Ahithophel's hostility toward David showed itself also on the following occasion. When David was digging the foundations of the temple, a shard was found at a depth of 1,500 cubits. David was about to lift it when the shard exclaimed, "Thou canst not do it." "Why not?" asked David. "Because I rest upon the abyss." Since when? Since the hour in which the voice of God was heard to utter the words from Sinai, "I am the Lord thy God, causing the earth to quake and sink into the abyss. I lie here to cover up the abyss." Nevertheless, David lifted the shard, and the waters of the abyss rose and threatened to flood the earth. Ahithophel was standing by, and he thought to himself, "Now David will meet with his death, and I shall be king." Just then David said, "Whoever knows how to stem the tide of waters and fails to do it will one day throttle himself." 69. Thereupon Ahithophel had the name of God inscribed upon the shard, and the shard thrown into the abyss. The waters at once commenced to subside, but they sank to so great a depth that David feared the earth might lose her moisture, and he began to sing the 15 songs of ascents to bring the waters up again. 70. Nevertheless, David's curse was realized. Ahithophel ended his days by hanging himself. His last will contain the following 3 rules of conduct. 71. 1. Refrain from doing aught against a favorite of fortune. 2. Take heed not to rise up against the royal house of David. 3. If the feast of Pentecost falls on a sunny day, then sow wheat. 72. Posterity has been favored with the knowledge of but a small part of Ahithophel's wisdom, and that little through 2 widely different sources, through Socrates, 73, who was his disciple, and through a fortune book written by him. 74.